We have a couple of news stories this morning, and we're going to get some take on that from Craig Wieland, who has founded the Wieland-Daveco Corporation, one of the leading construction firms in the country. He is here with us in person in our Gillespie Group storefront studio because the title that he wants to talk about today is Author, and that's a pretty good title. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Michael Patrick. How are you?
When did you decide to make the transition to being an author?
Well, actually, I didn't decide that. It kind of happened.
Did it?
Yeah. I've got 5 daughters. In raising them, of course, I'm a conservative, and I wanted them to be conservatives. And while I was raising them, I was teaching them through stories, and I was putting these stories in writing. And last Christmas, my daughter Jill came up with a harebrained idea that we'd have homemade Christmas gifts. And I thought, what in the world am I going to make my kids for Christmas? And so my wife suggested putting all of these stories and poems in a little pamphlet and giving them to the kids for Christmas. And so I did. While I was doing that, I was passing it around to my coworkers, and they said, hey, this stuff's pretty good. And so after Christmas, I said, well, maybe I'll, make it a little bit more professional. And as I was putting it together, I ended up with a 280-page book with 400 illustrations. And I said, you know what, maybe I'll try and sell it. And so that's what I did. It kind of came out of the lessons that I used to raise my daughters, and now I've got a book.
So these were parables that you used to sort of illustrate your point?
Yeah, right. I mean, it's difficult to train a kid to be a conservative using the existing books that are on the marketplace. Most of them, I say, are like preaching to the choir. They're for older people who are already conservative, and it just kind of stokes the fire there. Where what do you do with a teenager to teach them conservative values? There's nothing really out there for that. So I wrote my own. And, they'd go to public schools, and we'd sit around the table at night and kind of reverse indoctrination. You really, you can't really tell a kid something. You kind of have to show them, and I would do that through poetry and rhymes, and the kids really liked it. And so it's very unique.
It's called Pointed Poems,
Right.
Tools for Teaching Conservative Thinking.
Right, yeah.
Where can people get the book?
Well, I've got a website, pointedpoems.com, and I've been selling quite a few books off there. And there's a lot of information about the poems on the website. Or you can go to Amazon. It's available there as well. Just type in Pointed Poems, and we're #1 because not a lot of books on poetry being sold right now.
Let's say that somebody sits down at this table and says, what does it mean? What does it mean to be a conservative?
Well, that's
Where do you begin?
Yeah, conservatism really is personal responsibility first, and then after that, it's the way you look at government, limited government. But really, the difference between a conservative and a liberal, in a broad sense, is who takes responsibility for the problems. Conservatives would say, if we see a problem, let's solve the problem. A liberal would look at it and say, we see a problem, but how can maybe there be a community or a government solution to this problem? And that really is the crux between conservatism and liberalism.
How would you? And obviously there are 1,000 little points along the way that illustrate a
Right.
conservative way of going about it.
Right.
So maybe. Can you give us a couple of examples of concrete ways that in the
sure.
book or to your kids?
Let me give you a prime example would be like if you see your neighbor in need, and right now we have a lot of people who are in need. I mean, Michigan has really difficult economic times. Rather than say, well, I'm sure my neighbor can get some help down in Lansing, whether it's through the welfare department or whatever, why don't you just solve your neighbor's need? Well, if they have a problem, if they need to get to work, why don't maybe you get together with your neighbors and get them to work if they can't afford a car, or if they're having problems, putting food on the table. Why don't you just help them? And it's kind of a novel concept, but it's the way it used to work in the old days, that if your neighbor needed help, you helped them. Today, we don't do it that way. We say, well, if they need help, they should go to Lansing. And then, of course, our taxes are high because we have to send our money to Lansing or to Washington to help them. So that'd be a practical way of a way a conservative would look at things.
The word, they used to call it the L word, liberal. It's
Right.
been bandied about in political campaigns. I remember it first in the Bush-Dukakis race, and that became a pejorative for a long time.
Right.
But it's not really a pejorative. It's just another way of looking at things.
When I wrote the book, in fact, the book is titled, I use the word thinking conservative. And really, thinking conservative as opposed to a yelling, screaming, hollering, name-calling conservative. There's enough of that going on today, and I'm not part of that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my liberal friends, I live out in Okemos, and we have dinner parties, and at 11 o'clock at night after the dinner party, they say, I enjoy talking to you because you approach things with a level head. You don't scream, you don't holler, and you're more of a thinking person. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really the future of the conservative movement is not necessarily in throwing a lot of bombs at the other side, but looking at the other side and saying, well, I see the way you're approaching it, but maybe there's a better way, which is without government, we solve problems. And so, you have to label, to write a book, you have to label people, right? You have to conservative, liberal, middle of the road. So what I did is I've kind of said this is the way a liberal would typically look at a situation, but this is the answer of the way a conservative would solve the problem. So it's 31 poems in there, so there's a lot of meat.
I guess if you look at some of the conservative voices right now, you think of people like Rush Limbaugh, Michael Steele, the GOP party chair, Sean Hannity to some degree, maybe Sarah Palin. We'll take her out of the mix for the moment, but those people are antagonistic.
They are. I have a lot of respect for those people, but they are also big media people. And
that's their job.
That's their job. Yeah, I more would align myself with William Buckley or George Will or Thomas Sowell or Walter Williams. I mean, these guys are conservatives, but they certainly they're level-headed people. You can sit down, you can talk to them, and they have very clear direction that they're going to, and they're necessarily to sell books, so they don't have to be flamethrowers. Yeah.
It's fun when you can have a good political conversation. I don't even want to call it debate because at a dinner party, debate goes too far. But when you can find people who don't get all upset,
right? Because
I've had that happen to me often too, and
that's not. There's no room for that. I'm gonna tell you something. This might strike a little near and dear to your heart, but J.P. McCarthy was able to carry on a conversation in his focus interviews that brought out the facts of where a person stood. There wasn't a lot of name calling. In fact, there was no name calling, and in the end, he respected the other side, and that's something that I do in my book. A lot of times, I'll refer to the liberal as my friend, or in the book, I have what's called points to ponder before the poem, which kind of describes the issue I'm talking about, and it gives the liberal's position in not a condescending way. It says this is the way a liberal would look at a situation, but I believe differently. And in the end, both sides are respected. It's just there's a clear difference in the way we approach a problem. So,
have you decided which candidate you're backing for governor?
No.
Really?
I really haven't.
13 days to go.
I'm going to say something here that'll probably hurt an awful lot of my friends. And I think you would assume that I would be voting for a Republican because I'm a conservative. And I most likely will vote for a Republican. But I just want to say, I see guys like Andy Dillon who are very pragmatic, who want to solve the problem, who really is not tilting to his left-wing base, and I see a lot of advantages to that. So, I mean, I am a conservative, but I'm also a pragmatist, and I want things to get done in Lansing. I think people like Andy Dillon have shown that you don't have to run to the extreme left if you're a Democrat. You can be a middle-of-the-road Democrat. And Michigan is a liberal state. It's a Democratic-leaning state. And if we had a middle-of-the-road Democrat, I think we could get some things done.
We do get lost in the labels of Democrat and Republican sometimes.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I guess they're helpful at a glance, but they can also be harmful because you
well,
disqualify people unnecessarily.
Right. When you go in the voting booth, you've got to throw the lever one way or another. So it does come down to that. I mean, you can't take 3/4 of Barack Obama and a quarter of John McCain.
Yeah.
That's not the way you vote. In the Republican primary, I mean, they all are saying pretty much the same thing. They are for limited government. And Michigan's got some issues I think they can help turn around, but it's going to be difficult. It's going to be a difficult decision.
Craig Wieland, I want to talk again soon, but how do people find the book?
At pointedpoems.com.
Pointedpoems.com. Yeah. Thank you very much for the chat. Good to see you.
Patrick. Appreciate it.
See you again soon here in our Gillespie Group storefront studio. Craig Wieland, the book again, Pointed Poems, Tools for Teaching Conservative Thinking. We're back in a flash.
It's in a book, a reading